If you wanted a recipe on why Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, is largely considered to be the perfect movie adaptation, we're gonna go through it all, going from its early history to how DreamWorks nearly fumbled the ball, to the 4 pillars the movie used to be loved by almost all who've seen it, despite using one of the most polarizing types of jokes. So first, how did this movie become a thing in the first place? When there was talks of making a movie for the popular series, it started out with a no for years, and you'd be surprised at who was saying no. For as much love Captain Underpants gets, there was also a lot of hate. Starting in 1997, Dave Pilkey established an empire, speaking to things that he felt the world didn't highlight. On the surface, it was 2 rebellious kids doing extremely immature and irresponsible things, but underneath that, you'll find that Dave simply wanted to express the kind of kid he was growing up. Unfortunately, my experience in a classroom growing up was not very positive. There weren't many resources for teachers back then to deal with kids like me who had learning, behavior, and reading challenges. The term ADHD didn't even exist back then.
I had ADHD. Actually, it was before they even had a term for it. They called it extreme hyperactivity when I was a kid. But my teacher didn't have the resources. She didn't know what to do with me, so she would send me out into the hallway.
Despite his overcomings, the Captain Underpants series would be heavily criticized for its language being unsuited for kids, and even banned in several places, topping the most banned books for several years, including 2012. Over titles such as 50 Shades of Grey. For Dave, he'd constantly defend his work, however he'd come to terms with how people felt. I don't feel like the books had any questionable content. There's no sex or nudity or drugs or anything like that, and the violence is like something you would see in a SpongeBob episode, Pilkey says. But no matter what you do, some people aren't going to like it, and that's just the way it goes. I just decided, yeah, you might have some people out there who don't like it, but you've got 80 million people who do. I'd rather focus on those. He enjoyed the fact that his work resonated with people and had so much fun working on a series, which is why for years he said no to working on a film adaptation. What made Dave change his mind? Well, DreamWorks had a trick up their sleeve that you would never see done in any other negotiation. While Pilkey was firm in wanting to complete the storyline of Captain Underpants, he spoke about one meeting that turned everything around. At one point, as part of the efforts to woo him, the author was invited to the DreamWorks campus and found it filled with staffers nonchalantly wearing underwear outside of their pants. They were completely straight-faced. It was so funny, Pilkey remembered. Finally, in 2011, his resistance softened and the animation studio acquired the feature film rights. And that's a good thing too, because DreamWorks would have a rough time in the 2010s. Among all of the early to mid 2010s catalog, DreamWorks was in less of a successful spot, which ended up nearly setting Captain Underpants up for failure. Deadline would report in 2015, DreamWorks Animation says it will reduce its output to 2 films a year from 3, as it seeks to maximize its creative talent and resources, reduce costs, and drive profitability. It will eliminate 500 jobs across all locations and all divisions of the studio. Now, why was DreamWorks downsizing? DreamWorks Animation shares have lost about 38.3% of their value over the last 52 weeks, with the underperformance of features including Turbo, Rise of the Guardians, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, and Penguins of Madagascar. The studio is cutting back its budgets, with the forthcoming Captain Underpants to be produced outside of the studio's pipeline at, quote, a significantly lower cost. This came with a lot of firsts for the movie. The film is the first DreamWorks production outsourced to a non-DreamWorks studio, and it's also the first DreamWorks film produced in Canada. At a budget of just $38 million, it is also the cheapest DreamWorks CGI film ever made. Despite being one of the most popular children's book series of the 21st century, the adaptation was already on thin ice for reasons outside of its control. And to top it off, its competition was another movie that wasn't trying to be that serious either.
Check this out.
Huh?
Son, please tell me you weren't laughing just now.
Both movies really didn't take themselves seriously, but how come the Emoji Movie did better at the box office, but is considered to be a worse movie than Captain Underpants? Well, that's pretty easy to answer, but that comes down to the 4 pillars that represent how Captain Underpants, the first epic movie, mastered the art of toilet humor to make a hilarious, action-packed, engaging, epic, and dare I even say, perfect Movie adaptation. The first pillar is so tough to do that just by achieving it, you already beat so many animated movies that come out each and every year. Yet this is one of the biggest praises that I can give to Captain Underpants that rarely anyone speaks about. The movie starts with George and Harold explaining the origins of the superhero that we'd see soon. And you gotta appreciate the animation styles here. However, the movie would take it up a notch as we go forward. Take note of the chemistry between George and Harold.
The leaders of Underpants World saved their baby by stretching his underwear really far, and then they shot him into space.
Godspeed, little Underpants.
And then he crashed on Earth where he was raised by some nice dolphins?
Yeah, dolphins. Just go with it.
Although it sounds backwards, the movie is more about George and Harold than it is about Captain Underpants, despite the latter being the name of the movie. Part of this is because George and Harold are the creators of Captain Underpants, but the other part is that Captain Underpants as a character is fairly limited, but this is by design, and most fans would rather it be that way.
Able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie.
Hey, alright, good for you, pal. Now put on some clothes, you weirdo.
No way!
Because of his cartoonishly predictable, larger-than-life personality and very unique appearance, it does force his character in a box of sorts that George and Harold do a great job of complementing with their unpredictable nature, working in synergy. Speaking of, the synergy and chemistry that you would see on screen was reflected off screen, represented by the trust Dave had in director David Soren. As while one was very passionate about following the source material strongly, the other was passionate about making a unique step away from it.
When we started working together, one of the things I told David is I don't like it when you read the book and then you go see the movie and it's exactly the same as the books. You kind of wonder why am I even here? This is boring. So I told David really early on that I wanted him, I wasn't gonna look over his shoulder. I wanted him to do whatever he could to bring out the best possible Captain Underpants movie, and that's exactly what happened.
With a healthy sense of freedom to explore and understand the characters, the result is that we get what movies like the Emoji Movie lack. As George and Harold speak about how cool Captain Underpants is, through his origin story, we meet another important character of the movie, Mr. Krupp.
The origin issue!
I've told you 1,000 times not to draw these idiotic comics.
Please.
Although we'll be diving into Mr. Krupp later, you feel that the duo are inviting you in to participate and witness the fun that they have together. And the reason many people enjoy George and Harold in this adaptation is because this movie does a really good job of talking to you, rather than talking down to you, which is the first pillar of why this movie is so fondly remembered. Again, to bring up the point with movies like the Emoji Movie, were they made out of genuine passion and connection of telling relatable and fun stories for kids, or were they made because in some board meeting they found that kids like emojis? You can see several examples where the dialogue feels so natural that you feel included rather than spoken for. You can hear it in how George and Harold would rant about Mr. Krupp.
Mean old Mr. Krupp hates anything fun, like comic books, recess, Christmas, even kittens.
It feels more like a friend ranting to you rather than generic exposition, and this was by design.
One of the things I did love about working with David is that the first thing he said to me was, this is about the kids making this movie. All the way through the movie, we kept asking ourselves, what would George and Harold do right now? And that was a big inspiration for the movie.
The deliberate choice to constantly frame almost every part of the movie through George and Harold's perspective colors the movie in their hyperactive personality, which makes it very personable to anyone who relates. While they don't enjoy Mr. Krupp, the feeling is mutual, as the duo are pulled into his office and accused of changing the school sign from a sewage trip to a much funnier message, which is pulling directly from the gags they'd often do in the books. Throughout the movie, you'll see that George and Harold are at odds with Mr. Krupp, as they both stand for the opposite principles. Pun intended. However, while the duo get a lot of praise from fans of the movie and fans of the franchise, this is only because of the circumstances. The crew decides to burn the ships and go all in on them and go all in on this type of humor, specifically because of their reputation out of universe. Normally on an animated movie, you're trying to appeal to every possible demographic, and often that results in your content being watered down a little bit. Obviously, we hope we get as wide of an audience as possible, but it's likely that if people have issues with the books, they may have issues with the movie too, and we didn't feel like we needed to waste a lot of time trying to rope them in. It allowed us to make the purest version of the movie.
Wow, that's a lot of pranks.
Yeah, when it's cut all together like that, you really get a sense of the scope.
Some of those must have been really hard to pull off.
And dangerous, like that tiger.
Oh, that tiger was crazy.
They also speak directly to the camera, which aids in the movie feeling like it speaks to you. So if that's the first pillar, the second pillar is even harder to do because the target can change per movie, per person, per era. Now, I think a lot of us can mention a show that also followed in lowbrow toilet humor that didn't make us laugh. It made us like yawn or cringe. So what makes moments like this funnier in comparison?
The seventh planet from the sun is called Uranus, known as a gas giant.
I don't get it. It's just science, guys.
So this is George and Harold explaining their backstory, which started with laughing at one of the easiest jokes to make. I've heard that joke back when Pluto was a planet. And it still is a planet to me. There will be quite a few jokes in this movie that it wasn't necessarily the first time that I've heard the joke, but I'd argue it's irreplaceable in this movie. It creates the charm that this movie needed to blow away the fans, including one we'll be getting to at the school. And speaking of the school, there's the Invention Convention, this mandatory school event that Mr. Krupp scheduled that only one student likes, which just so happens to be the same student who didn't understand the Uranus joke within George and Harold's backstory. We'll get to him soon. There's sunny days turn into a dark and gloomy day with a tragic march into Jerome Horvitz Elementary, and Mr. Krupp would start the convention saying something that sounds minor, but is actually very important to the movie for reasons we'll get into soon.
Quick announcement. Our science teacher, Mr. Fide, is no longer with us. He wanted to spend Saturday with his family. So I fired him. I'll find a replacement next week.
It is here at the Invention Convention that we'd see another one of the movie's funniest moments that perfectly encapsulates the second pillar. But let's speak about Melvin.
Melvin Sneedley is a straight-A student. He's an overachiever. He is missing a part of his brain that registers a sense of humor.
As the only kid who would be excited to show up to school on a Saturday, he came with 17 inventions to show off just for extra credit and the recognition that he gets from Mr. Krupp. In fact, if it were up to him, the school would be full of Melvins, which would actually either be a nightmare or the greatest school rivalries I've ever seen in my life. Unfortunately, the drab and serious atmosphere of the school has broken the spirits of many of the children there. Fortunately, they have George and Harold who are willing to risk it all. As they sneak on stage to sabotage Melvin's inventions, it should be noted that one of the 17 inventions appears to be watching their every move, which is unfortunately going to be their downfall. But not for now.
Now included, automatic toilet paper wiping cloth.
Trademark!
Toilet paper rains into the child audience with them using the toilet paper to demonstrate the contrast between a boring convention and a memorable Saturday. However, yes, TPing things can be immature in practice, but that's kind of the key to this second pillar. There's a difference between something being tasteful and something being shameful. So what makes Captain Underpants tasteful is the fact that the artist took pride in getting very cartoony shots, like this toilet paper trampoline or this toilet paper dance party. Simply put, this doesn't feel like it was added in because someone wants to copy TPing things from some other kid's show or movie, but rather a thoughtful and imaginative approach to displaying George and Harold's imagination, planting the seeds of Melvin's revenge against the duo, showcasing the odds at stake, which is a happy school versus a miserable one, and prove exactly why Mr. Krupp is at odds with the duo for ruining his vision of how the Invention Convention would go. It's creative and story-driven using TP. That makes it tasteful. Now, you need to nail the second pillar to make the third pillar easier to do. In most movies, the third pillar is needed, but I'd argue because of the immaturity of this movie, it actually makes the third pillar even more important than the first two. And you may think I'm exaggerating for the purposes of a YouTube video, so let me ask you, how many animated TV shows can you name with lowbrow toilet humor just like this that have written just as good of a bond between George and Harold? You could think of all the shows, there's plenty of shows that use this exact humor. That number would be very low. However, how many serious or story-driven shows can you name that have a great bond between the two main characters? I bet you the answer would be quite high. Most media that approaches making something that's gonna be silly and stupid often practice not putting in too much effort to get you to care about the bond between the main characters. Look, I love Johnny Test, but they focus more on the jokes than they did the bond between Johnny and Dookie. I think Fanboy and Chum Chum is pretty good, but I'd be hard pressed to name moments that show just as genuine of a bond as George and Harold. This is because for those shows and many other immature shows, they front-loaded with jokes rather than character development because that is what we expect from those kind of shows. Imagine here if the bond between George and Harold was as thin as it could be in other immature shows. The jokes are great, don't get me wrong, but it is this genuine connection, which is the third pillar, that solidifies the movie as one of DreamWorks' highlights. In fact, it is this genuine connection that we all love that gets the ultimate test. Melvin would admit that one of his inventions was designed to tattletale on George and Harold, which gives Mr. Krupp the evidence that he needs to make a big change in their lives.
So I'm going to have you two placed in separate classes. I'm going to annihilate your friendship.
What? No!
You see? You won't be together.
And just like that, the stakes are at an all-time high, and you'd care about them because of those three pillars. They spent this movie speaking to you and not talking down to you as you got to know them. Their brand of immaturity is tasteful and creative rather than pandering, and because of their friendship, you want to root for them to overcome this obstacle. I mean, just look at how Harold illustrates their future now that they're in separate classrooms.
Friends, separated. Promising each other they'll remain besties, but within months, we'll be awkwardly bumping into each other at the mall. Oh, hey, George.
Hey, do I know you?
It's so creative in how it shows the point and brings you into their minds. They have to do something, and their strategy lands on stealing the evidence so that Mr. Krupp's punishment will be baseless. Although it appears to be easy because Mr. Krupp is more invested in speaking to Edith, the lunch lady, who was made for the movie. Kinda. Unfortunately, getting wrapped up in the other confiscated stuff Mr. Krupp has took from them in their office, which includes this hypno ring, they get caught, showing their efforts were futile as Mr. Krupp just kept the evidence on him. And stuff like this works the best in silly and wacky comedies because you could just make any adult in it as unhinged in any way possible. George, with no option left, uses the hypno ring as a last resort, and despite all logic, it works.
When I snap my fingers, you will obey our every command. You are now a chicken.
I'm sure you see where this goes. With the comics in one hand and Mr. Krupp figuratively in the other, the boys decide to turn what was a very grumpy and fun-hating principal into their wackiest creation, the crime-fighting superhero who hates most clothes,
The amazing Captain Underpants!
There will always be something so interesting about characters like Captain Underpants that I also enjoy with Mermaid Man or the Crimson Chin, and to a lesser extent Mojo Jojo, although he's not exactly a one-to-one, but all of these characters are so gimmicky that while it limits how they normally act, they can turn any mundane experience into a colorful one because they're so wrapped up in their worldview. Just like those three character examples I said earlier, Captain Underpants, the movie, spends no time in letting you see the chaos that Captain Underpants, the character, can enact. Also, from a story perspective, we swap the dynamic that George and Harold had with Mr. Krupps. Initially, Krupps had to chase down the duo as their pranks were getting out of control. Now the duo has to chase down Captain Underpants before he truly gets himself into big trouble. The tables turn, which keeps the pacing of the movie fresh. And speaking of fresh, we get a fresh character to speak about. If you remember Mr. Krupps firing the science teacher, it actually comes back to haunt him, without him knowing.
A science teacher? The perfect cover!
As we'd learned with Professor P, he is on a specific mission that, if achieved, will ruin George, Harold, and the rest of Jerome Horvitz Elementary. Well, except for one person. But before we get to what exactly happened there, surely now you see the power of these first three pillars, but there's one last pillar that only makes sense once you see who Professor P is, and why he's important to the movie, and while he'll be important to the movie. This pillar is the most important, but it only makes sense if the first three pillars are achieved. Without it, it turns one of the best film adaptations into one that's decent at best. Now, before we get to Professor P, it's important to show what Captain Underpants' weakness is.
Stop doing this! I am Captain. What are you doing? Hello? Well, hello! What's happening? You're not!
While water is his greatest weakness, the movie goes over another vulnerability he has when George and Harold transport his body to his house. When you see it at face value, it's showing in every way that he wants no visitors around. When George and Harold snoop around against their better judgment, they're rewarded with the visuals of a lonely man. A single light bulb, a single fork, a single toothbrush, a his and also his towel, which could be progressive, you never know. George and Harold express a small fear of becoming like Mr. Krupp, bitter and alone. However, little do they know, they'll be helping him out with that, even if they don't want to. The next day at school, their attitude changes from cautious to bold, and you can see this gives the other students hope to express themselves as well. And why are they so bold? Well, because they have control over Mr. Krupp and aren't afraid to exploit it. However, in turning him into Captain Underpants again, they'll have to guide him into being a principal, which isn't exactly easy for his larger-than-life personality. Except in one area.
Oh, hello! Oh, surprise! It's Edith. Did you like my tuna casserole?
So pause for context, this is Edith, the lunch lady, voiced by Kirsten Shaw.
Edith is a little rough around the edges. I think she's a lot like the food that she makes. Hearty, but not quite delicious. But there's love involved. She's single, she's shy, she's very introverted, and she's special.
She gave Mr. Krupp a casserole earlier when George and Harold were trying to sneak into his office to get the turtle. It seems like he never got around to eating it, but it doesn't seem to matter.
Oh my, 2 blue eyes.
Principal Krupp, it's time to go. Gotta wrap it up.
Come on, don't kill their vibe. It's very clear that they both need this. It is here where we get a proper introduction into Professor P, and I adore how cartoonishly evil he is. This movie does not hold any subtleties back in how Professor P is shown. As blatant as Mr. Krupp's hatred for all things happy and sunshine is the same level of Professor P's aggressive expression of his hatred of laughter. In fact, he'd be working on an experiment to remove the ability of laughter and plans to use the school as a base to try it out. That'll be terrible for all the children, except one. And how does he plan to do this?
This is the Ha-Ha Gafar Chuckleomelis. This funny little purple pot holds our entire capacity for laughter.
He's been looking to destroy the laughter gland, and that'll be a big part of the movie. Melvin, the only kid who shouldn't have to worry about this, is already being a suck-up to Professor P. Now, with all of that said, you, the person watching this, are in one of two groups right now. The people who know what the P stands for, and the people who are about to experience true comedy, which aids in why the fourth pillar works so well here. Speaking of comedy, one of my favorite scenes happens here, where Captain Underpants unintentionally douses himself with water while George and Harold are in class, which unintentionally leads into miscommunication at its most funny.
Wait, is he Krupp again?
George!
Yep, pretty sure he is.
Harold!
How'd that even happen?
Tra-la-la!
In researching Professor P, they realize that the P doesn't stand for pancreas, or pyramid, or Paraguay, or please check out these two cool merch designs at alphaj.show/merch. They're both really fun. You have the mech panda and the bobblehead J design. I love them both. It's in the description and the pinned comment below. But actually, the P in Professor P stands for poopy pants, and it doesn't take too long for the other children to find out about this, which leads into Professor Poopy Pants experiencing a harsh flashback.
Am I pronouncing it right? Poopy pants.
More or less, except the emphasis is on the poop. Why are you laughing?
Little do they know, but George and Harold have made a great enemy out of Professor Poopy Pants, but it isn't just because they leaked his name. Actually, it comes from their latest comic, which tells the tale of Captain Underpants fighting against Professor Poopy Pants in such a way that it inspires the real-life variant to enact on those plans.
You boys don't even realize it, but your silly comic book just helped me figure out how to wipe out laughter on the roof.
However, he'd need someone to help him, and that's where Mr. Suckup comes back into play. Melvin plays such an important role in this story, but he's not exactly front and center as much as I thought he was gonna be when I was going into the movie, and I wonder if in the series he plays a bigger role, because I believe there's a lot more potential to his character. It's important to note that Professor P uses Melvin for his lack of humor, which was shown earlier, and Melvin is using Professor P for extra credit, making this villainy mutually beneficial. But for now, with the toxic energy energy of Edith the lunch lady's concoction here, the two of them will rival the power of George, Harold, and Captain Underpants soon enough. Now that you understand who Professor Poopy Pants is, it's time to speak about the fourth pillar. So as mentioned before, the movie is making a conscious effort to speak to kids rather than at them, and it leads into the so-called lowbrow humor to appear more tasteful than shameful. However, that is only the backdrop for the incredible connection George and Harold have that leads the viewer to care about them and their brand of comedy. However, it is through actually understanding the last pillar that it turns it from a decent at best movie to a strong contender for the best book to animated film adaptation. And that fourth pillar is that it doesn't take itself seriously. Now there's two different ways to interpret the phrase "don't take it seriously." One is very, very wrong and will lead into bad movies, and the other is so chaotic that in the right hands, it leads into some of the most imaginative work. You see, there's one type of people where they hear "don't take it seriously" and they just make slop because it's for kids who need to take it seriously. And then there's a second way, which is to not care about what should work and only do what is funny and what is authentic above all else, thus not taking the judgment of what they're trying to do seriously. And that led into the Fart Symphony. I mean, it is ridiculous, but how many other movies could make this work? Again, it's not taking itself seriously. Even the sympathy scene with Professor P is full of jokes because they don't want the villain to appear that sympathetic at all. However, inversely, they are taking the presentation and faithfulness to toilet humor seriously. It's a very important distinction to make here. Captain Underpants cosplaying as Mr. Krupp, which is kind of funny, leads the way of a day of fun on the outside of the school in the form of amusement rides, no teachers, and lots of sugar. However, this comes with a huge price.
Harold, I really want some sugar.
Me too.
We made the wrong choice!
This did not solve anything!
Hey, suckers! Check this out! Geronimo!
Mind you, Captain Underpants has no reason to fear water because he goes away when exposed to water. And I guess you can ask, why don't George and Harold simply inform him of what happens around water or make up some kind of lie? But knowing Captain Underpants, he may take it as a challenge to overcome water and thus ruin their control over Mr. Krupp. As much as they wish to protect Captain Underpants, it becomes too much to handle. He's a ball of energy, and all George and Harold want to do is spend time together making comics and doing pranks, not babysitting a grown man in his underpants. Unfortunately, as Captain Underpants crashes the Ferris wheel into the school, their control over Mr. Krupp is neutralized, as the worst possible thing could occur: rain.
You two, your friendship is no more.
After all the fun and all the adventures, everything finally catches up to them. The movie makes you feel for these pranksters because all they wanted to do was brighten the days of everyone around them. You see how miserable the children are at Jerome Horvitz Elementary during the invention convention when Mr. Krupp was running things and Melvin was being the class snitch. You add Professor P's pursuit to get rid of laughter on top of that, and you have a recipe for a terrible childhood. That school day that Captain Underpants gave them was probably the best day of their lives up to that point. You put a fair like that in my backyard and that's the best day of my adulthood. Who are you kidding? But it was always a losing battle, as at some point Mr. Krupp would get up to speed on their tricks and they wouldn't be able to snap him back into hypnosis. Unfortunately, these two get separated at the worst possible time.
The world as you know it is about to go extinct, and a new world order is about to rise.
We get to the final battle. And while George and Harold may be separated in terms of classrooms, they are united in their goal. Powered by Melvin, Professor Poopy Pants wishes to rid every student at Jerome Horvitz Elementary of their laugh gland by using the Turbo Toilet 2000. At the end of the day, George and Harold are just kids. How are they gonna stop a mad scientist on a giant toilet monster? Luckily, they won't have to because of a single snap. Now, I am gonna be fair here. How much of a hero Captain Underpants has been in this movie is debatable, but if anyone can stop this, it has to be him. I mean, all of this is the destiny created in the comic, and surely George and Harold wouldn't have written him to lose, right? Right? Well, speaking of loss, there's at least one kind of funny, kind of sad meta joke that comes from the movie losing some of its budget.
Freeze!
The following sequence contains scenes that are so intense, horrific, and violent,
And expensive.
that we can only show it using a technology known as Flip-O-Rama!
They played a friendly game of paddleball. Oh, no! Darn. Okay, what's next? Oh, yes. Then, Poopy Pants summoned an army of dolphins!
Wait, what? Why are you always sneaking dolphins into the movie?
What do you have against dolphins, anyway?
I don't have nothing against dolphins, it just didn't happen!
Well, so what? We get to say what happened. It's a flip-o-rama. So, they shot themselves to the top of the Turbo Toilet 2000. But to keep things dramatic, they didn't quite make it. And then...
What happened to the Flip-O-Rama?
Luck and paper are not on the duo side, as Captain Underpants gets easily taken care of, and they don't have enough paper to solve this situation, but have enough to at least try and speak sense into Professor Poopy Pants and apologize for making fun of his name. I gotta pause, because trying to speak sense into someone named Professor Poopy Pants is wild, and it didn't even work because they learned about his full name. Yes, there's even more to Professor P than Poopy Pants.
But there's nothing funny about Professor Pee-Pee Diarrheenstein Poopy Pants Esquire.
Who are your parents, and why did they hate you? By laughing at his full name, George and Harold don't do themselves any favors. In fact, this is where we finally get a closer look at the brains of George and Harold, and see that the portion that handles laughter is abnormally big. It even surprises Poopy Pants, which, by the way, someone with the word poop in her name should never be surprised at the size of anything. However, he drives a Turbo Toilet 2000 into full throttle, and we get another style change in the movie. This one in particular showcases the comedic core of both George and Harold, in which they lose the ability to find things funny until they hear just one word.
Attention everyone, Poopy Pants here with a little update on the poop again. I decided to wipe out laughter on the entire planet. After that, you know, I'll probably move on to other planets, Jupiter, Mars, can't forget Uranus.
Wait, did he just say...
If there's any way that George and Harold would save themselves, it'd have to be through laughter. It's such a trademark of their personality. They'd laugh so hard, it causes the Turbo Toilet 2000 to malfunction, leading Melvin to retreat, depleting its power source and rendering it defeated. However, the fight isn't over, as there's another battle with Professor Poopy Pants and his resizing ray. Except this time, Captain Underpants comes to save the day. But this time, he can show off his unlimited underwear powers, which is kinda cool. I mean, with that power, you can beat Fruit of the Loom at its own game, and you can just buy a better school to go to at that point. Maybe we'll get that in Captain Underpants too, getting solid interest rates on owning a school. The action is jam-packed with moments of both sides getting the upper hand, pun kind of intended. At the end of the day, just like the comic likely predicted, good prevails over evil. Although, can we talk about one scene really quick?
Nice work, sidekicks. I'll just put this back down right here.
No, Captain Underpants, go!
There we go. Back to normal, like it never happened.
Those kids are dead, right? Like, gone? Wasted? No longer on this earth? Because I don't think they'd survive that. And if they're gone, doesn't that make Captain Underpants like a mass... Never mind. We're almost done with this. We don't have time to think about that. Captain Underpants, in his generational fumbling of the battle, swats Professor Poopy Pants away for another battle, and they flee the scene before they're caught. George and Harold learn that they cannot keep up with Captain Underpants and decide to remove the hypnosis for good, but at least leave a thank you present for Mr. Krupp playing nicely.
You want to go on a date? A date? Love.
Principal Krupp. Oh, Benjamin Krupp, you sly dog.
Not gonna lie, I think they're very adorable. I also think it's wholesome that Mr. Krupp decides to give George and Harold their comics back, as it leads into a big full circle moment of why people enjoy this movie so much.
Considering they're completely implausible, juvenile, and filled with the lowest form of wit, potty humor, they're actually pretty funny.
But more important than their bond is George and Harold, who learned that even if they were to be separated in classes, they vowed to always remain best friends. I mean, after all, they have this amazing treehouse that's in the middle of their houses, and if you let Kevin Hart tell you, there weren't any tree houses in the hood.
I told them earlier, I was like, yo, ain't no tree, ain't no grass.
There's one untied knot left though. As you may remember, the Turbo Toilet 2000 was powered by the toxic lunch lady concoction, which the movie doesn't really highlight too much, that in dumping it this way and letting it marinate over these other things may lead into some nasty side effects, like even more toilets coming to life.
Principal Krupp!
Hang on, sidekicks!
Now, while this movie mastered toilet humor and beat all odds in becoming a banger of a movie, there's another piece of media that was also built on previous media that didn't take itself seriously, but had a different trajectory. In fact, in not taking itself seriously and using lowbrow humor, it'd have a very different reputation. You can see why another silly property, like Teen Titans Go, had a rougher time with its silly and lowbrow humor here.